Have you ever wondered what happened after one of the greatest prophets in the Bible died? Daniel was no ordinary man. He stood firm in his faith even while living in a foreign land. He survived the lion's den, interpreted dreams that changed kingdoms, and served under powerful kings like Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Darius. His wisdom and connection to God were so strong that even kings listened to him. He was a voice of truth during dark times. But then, Daniel died. And that's when everything changed. What happened next might surprise you. In fact, the moment Daniel passed away, a series of shocking events began to unfold. Events that shaped history and fulfilled ancient prophecies. Most people know about Daniel's life, but few talk about what came right after. His death wasn't just the end of a faithful servant. It marked the beginning of something far bigger. In this video, we're going to uncover 7 shocking events that happened immediately after Daniel died. These are not just small details. These are major moments that affected nations, kings, and the future of God's people. Some of them were expected, foretold in Daniel's own visions. Others will leave you speechless. Did the empire fall because Daniel was no longer there to guide it? Did God allow chaos to rise after the death of his faithful servant? And did Daniel's death unlock the beginning of new prophecy? There's a deep mystery here, a chain reaction that started with Daniel's final breath. So don't go anywhere. Stay with me as we count down these 7 shocking events. Each one is connected to Daniel in some way, and each one shows us just how powerful his role was, even in death. By the end of this video, you'll not only see Daniel in a new light, but you'll also gain a deeper understanding of how God's hand was still moving long after his prophet was gone. After Daniel died, one of the first shocking events was the fall of the Babylonian Empire. Daniel had been a powerful voice of wisdom and truth in the royal court for many years. He advised kings, interpreted dreams, and helped keep Babylon strong by giving God's messages to its leaders. But when he passed away, everything started to fall apart. Without Daniel's guidance, Babylon lost its most trusted advisor. He wasn't just a wise man, he was a connection between God and the kingdom. Once Daniel was gone, the empire began to crumble from the inside. One of the biggest problems was King Belshazzar. Unlike King Nebuchadnezzar, who eventually learned to respect God, Belshazzar was proud and foolish. He didn't listen to God. In fact, during a great feast, he mocked God by drinking from the holy cups that were taken from the temple in Jerusalem. That very night, something strange happened. A hand appeared and wrote words on the wall. No one could understand the message, except Daniel. Daniel was called one last time to interpret the writing. He told Belshazzar that his kingdom was about to fall, and it did. That night, the Medes and Persians entered Babylon and took over the empire. Belshazzar was killed. Although this happened shortly before Daniel's death, his passing marked the final end of Babylon's glory. Without Daniel's wisdom and prayers, the kingdom stood no chance. His death was like the last light going out in a dark room. Babylon, once the most powerful empire, became history. The fall was fast, and the people were shocked. It was clear, without Daniel, Babylon was weak, and it could not survive. When Daniel died, it wasn't just the end of a man's life. It was the end of a powerful prophetic voice. Daniel was one of the last major prophets in the Bible. God spoke to him through dreams, visions, and angels. He didn't just tell the future, he explained what God was doing behind the scenes of history. Daniel warned kings, guided empires, and gave hope to the Jewish people while they were living in a foreign land. His visions weren't small. He spoke about the rise and fall of nations, the coming of the Messiah, and the end of time. But when he died, that voice suddenly went silent. For many years after Daniel's death, there were no bigger prophetic messages from God. It was like the heavens went quiet. The Jewish people, who were already in exile and far from home, now felt even more alone. Without Daniel, they had no one to interpret dreams, no one to explain what God was planning, and no one to give clear guidance. This silence made things harder for the Jewish people. Many began to lose hope. Others held tightly to Daniel's words, believing that everything he said would still come true, even if he was no longer alive. Daniel's death marked the end of an era of prophecy. It reminded the people that they had to walk by faith, trusting the words God had already spoken. His prophecies would live on, but his voice would not be replaced for a long time. The loss was deep. Daniel was not just a prophet, he was a symbol of God's presence. Without him, the world felt a little darker, and the people of God had to wait patiently for the next voice to rise. One of Daniel's most important prophecies was about the fall of Babylon. He had seen visions of future kingdoms rising and falling, and he clearly said that Babylon would not last forever. After Daniel died, that prophecy began to come true in a powerful way. Right after Daniel's death, the Medes and Persians invaded Babylon. This wasn't just a random war. It was something God had already shown Daniel years before. In one of his visions, Daniel saw a chest and arms made of silver, which represented a new kingdom that would take over after Babylon. That new kingdom was the Medo-Persian Empire. With Daniel gone, Babylon no longer had a strong spiritual protector. The king at the time, Belshazzar, had already ignored Daniel's warning and acted with pride and disrespect toward God. That led to his death and the fall of the city. The Persians, led by King Cyrus, quickly took over Babylon. They were powerful and smart. They didn't destroy the city, but they took control fast and without much fighting. It was almost like Babylon fell overnight. Many people were shocked. How could such a strong empire fall so quickly? But Daniel had already spoken of this moment. His prophecy was coming true, step by step. The timing is important. Daniel's death wasn't just the end of a life. It was the moment right before a major shift in world power. It was like God was waiting until Daniel finished his mission. Then, just as he said, the next empire rose up. The invasion of the Medes and Persians was not just a war. It was a fulfillment of prophecy, proving again that Daniel was right and that God's plan was moving forward. Daniel was not just a prophet, he was also a powerful and respected leader in the royal court of Babylon. From a young age, he served in the palace, starting under King Nebuchadnezzar. Even though Daniel was a Jewish exile, his wisdom and godliness made him stand out. He could understand dreams, explain hard mysteries, and always gave credit to God. King Nebuchadnezzar trusted Daniel more than anyone. He made him a ruler over the whole province of Babylon and placed him in charge of other wise men. Whenever there was trouble, like a strange dream or a big decision, the king turned to Daniel for help. But after Daniel died, something changed. That strong voice of truth and wisdom was suddenly gone. There was no one left in the court who spoke boldly for God. The kings that followed, like Belshazzar, did not listen to God the way Nebuchadnezzar eventually did. And without Daniel's presence, there was no one to remind them. Daniel's godly influence had helped keep the kingdom stable. His advice saved lives, brought peace, and kept leaders from making foolish choices. When he died, the court lost that guiding light. The new rulers were proud, careless, and had no fear of God. This led to a spiritual and political decline. The palace was now full of selfish leaders who only cared about power, not truth. The balance Daniel had once brought to the kingdom was lost. His death left a huge void, not just in leadership, but in faith. Babylon was no longer the same without him. The court, once touched by God through Daniel, now walked in darkness. And without Daniel's voice, the fall of Babylon came even faster. One of the most famous stories in the Bible is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel was an old man when it happened, but he was still faithful to God. Even though a new law said people could only pray to the king, Daniel kept praying to God 3 times a day, just like he always had. Because of this, his enemies had him thrown into a den of hungry lions. But God protected him. Not a single lion touched him. He spent the whole night in the den, and in the morning, he was still alive and unharmed. King Darius was amazed and gave glory to Daniel's God. This moment showed the power of faith and how God could protect his people even in the worst situations. But what happened after Daniel died? Without Daniel, there was no strong, godly leader left in the royal court. He had been a protector, not just through his wisdom, but through his prayers and faith. His presence helped keep the Jewish people safe in a foreign land. With Daniel gone, that protection was no longer there. This made the Jewish people more vulnerable to persecution. There was no one in the palace to speak up for them. If another law was passed that went against their faith, who would defend them? Who would risk their life like Daniel did to stand up for what was right? Daniel's death was more than a personal loss. It was the loss of a spiritual shield. His bravery in the lion's den had saved lives and won respect for the Jewish faith. Now, without him, many feared that the same kind of faith might no longer be protected. It was a time of uncertainty, fear, and deep loss. After Daniel died, many people wondered, who will lead us now? Daniel had been a powerful voice for God. He helped kings, warned nations, and gave the Jewish people hope while they were far from home in Babylon. But now, he was gone. At first, there didn't seem to be anyone like Daniel to take his place. His level of wisdom and connection to God was hard to replace. This caused confusion and sadness among the Jewish people. They had relied on Daniel for spiritual guidance during tough times. Without him, many felt lost and unsure about the future. But God was not done speaking to his people. Not long after Daniel's death, new leaders began to rise up, men like Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra was a priest and a scribe. He knew the law of God very well and helped teach it to the people. He reminded them of God's commands and helped bring them back to a life of faith and worship. Nehemiah was a strong leader who helped rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He wasn't a prophet like Daniel, but he had a heart for God's people and helped restore their city and their hope. Even though these new leaders were different from Daniel, they were still chosen by God. They helped guide the Jewish people during a new time in history, when they were allowed to return to Jerusalem after many years in exile. So while Daniel's death marked the end of one chapter, God was already writing the next. Ezra and Nehemiah carried the torch, reminding the people that God was still with them, even after the loss of a great prophet like Daniel. Even though Daniel had died, his words were not forgotten. In fact, many of the prophecies he gave started to come true right after his death. This showed that God was still working through Daniel's message, even though the prophet himself was gone. One of Daniel's most important visions was about a statue made of different metals. Each part of the statue represented a kingdom that would rise and fall. The head of gold was Babylon, which Daniel lived through. But the chest and arms of silver represented the Persian Empire, which came right after Babylon fell. This prophecy came true very quickly. After Daniel died, the Medes and Persians took over Babylon, just like he had seen in his vision. The people realized that Daniel hadn't been guessing. He had truly heard from God. Daniel also had visions about future rulers, battles, and even a powerful king who would come much later. Many believe this pointed to the rise of Alexander the Great and even the Roman Empire. These things didn't happen right away, but some of them started to become clearer after Daniel's death. For the Jewish people, these prophecies were a sign of hope. Even though they had lost Daniel, they could still read his words and understand what was coming. His prophecies helped them prepare for the future and trust that God was in control of history. So, while Daniel's voice had gone silent, his message became louder than ever. Kingdoms rose and fell just as he said. His visions were like a map, showing people what was coming next. Daniel may have died, but his prophecies lived on, and they continued to shape the world long after he was gone. We've just looked at 7 shocking events that happened right after the death of the prophet Daniel, and each one shows just how important his life and message really were. First, we saw the fall of Babylon, the great empire that collapsed quickly after Daniel was gone. Then we talked about the end of prophecy, when Daniel's death marked a long pause in God's messages to his people. After that came the invasion of the Medes and Persians, a direct fulfillment of Daniel's own prophecy. Next was the disappearance of Daniel's influence in the court. Without his wisdom and godliness, the royal court was lost. Then we revisited the lion's den, realizing how Daniel's courage once protected his people, and how his death left them vulnerable. After that, we saw the shift in prophetic leadership, when new leaders like Ezra and Nehemiah began to rise. Finally, we looked at the prophecies that became relevant, as Daniel's visions started to come true, even after his death. All of this reminds us that Daniel was more than just a wise man. He was a man of faith, courage, and deep connection with God. His influence didn't end with his life. In many ways, it grew even stronger after he was gone. Now it's your turn. Which of the 7 events surprised you the most? Was there something you never knew about Daniel's impact? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about biblical history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who love discovering hidden truths in the Bible. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more powerful stories from Scripture.